Hello, my friend. Welcome to the study. Paideia of children from paideo, to raise children, or the bringing up, training, and education of youth and a child. Very important to the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Whose Republic we will look at today. In Plato's Republic, he describes an allegory of a cave. It is a thought experiment that was part of a long dialectic or philosophical conversation exploring the effects of the paideia, or upbringing and education, and the lack of it on our human nature. The dialogue occurs between Plato's brother Glaucon and Socrates, Plato's teacher and mentor. Socrates narrates this conversation in Plato's Republic. In illustrating his idea, Socrates describes to Glaucon a group of people who have lived in a cave all their lives, chained to face a blank wall. They watch shadows that are projected onto the wall from objects passing in front of the fire behind them. These shadows become, or are, their reality. But as Socrates and Glaucon know, are not true representations of the real world as they know it. One of these prisoners makes the journey outside the cave to see the world beyond. He then returns to tell the others what he has seen. There are several interpretations of this allegory, and it has yielded much philosophical introspection and conversation through the ages. It has influenced thinkers and writers of fiction and non-fiction for centuries. Among them, Francis Bacon, Thomas Browne, Ray Bradbury, H.G. Wells, and C.S. Lewis, and many, many more who seek to explore the ideas of reality, perception, form, education, persuasion, and to ask questions about human nature. These shadows that the prisoners see represent fragments of reality, and we can perceive them through our senses. We shall delve into the allegory itself. In the Republic, look at a few of these interpretations and discussions, and then, in true secret scholar fashion, follow the allegory with an interpretation study style. So make yourself comfortable, my friend, and let's delve into the dream world of thought, of philosophical debate, of allegory. This is an old copy of Plato's Republic with the translation by Sir Desmond Lee, printed by Penguin Books. You can see it's well used and it's been read many times. Here we have some background on Plato. He was born in 427 BC, 4 years after the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War, and just over a year after the death of Pericles. Plato's father died when Plato was only a few years old. He was a member of an old and distinguished Athenian family, as was his mother, Perictione, had 2 other sons, who were Plato's older brothers, Adeimantus and Glaucon, who will be, in this book, speaking with Socrates. After his father's death, Perictione married her second husband, Pyrilampus, a close friend and supporter of Pericles, and prominent in public life. And so Plato came from a distinguished family with many political connections. We know little of Plato's early years. Although we know about Athenian society and the Peloponnesian War, as well as a plague that struck Athens. The final downfall of Athens came in 404 BC, was again followed by an oligarchic revolution, this time carried through with the help of victorious Spartan arms. Much of this history we have from Thucydides. And this goes on to outline the tumultuous atmosphere into which Plato grew up. It tells about his education and travels to Italy. And the influences he had for writing his Republic. In 388 to 387 BC, Plato visited South Italy, perhaps in order to make the acquaintance of some of the Pythagorean philosophers living there. The Orphic Pythagorean belief in the afterlife and the Pythagorean emphasis on mathematics as a philosophic discipline certainly influenced him strongly. From Italy he crossed to Sicily and visited the court of Dionysius I of Syracuse. There he learned something of tyranny firsthand. He also made the acquaintance of the tyrant's brother-in-law, Dion, who was deeply impressed with Plato's ideas about politics. When Plato returned to Athens, in about the year 386 BC, founded the Academy, where he taught all the rest of his life. The Academy was founded as a school for statesmen. Plato had decided that nothing could be done with contemporary politics and contemporary politicians. He therefore decided to set up a school where a new type of politician could be trained, and where the would-be politician might learn to be a philosopher-ruler. He probably did not expect any very immediate results, but he continued to hope. In his own phrase, some statesmen into philosophers. There was a tradition that had started by the sophists. In the previous century, they were traveling teachers and lecturers who appeared in the middle of the century in response to the demand for an education that went beyond the grounding in the works of the poets which formed the traditional Greek curriculum. They taught most things, but since success in life is what most men want, and since the ability to persuade your neighbor is always an important element in success, and was particularly important in the Greek democracies, they all taught rhetoric, the art of self-expression and persuasion. From this purely practical, political interest, many of them proceeded to political and moral theory. Rhetorical training was in fact a continuation of educational tradition. Training in the art of self-expression, of composing and setting out a coherent and persuasive argument. This provided an educational discipline that was, together with the literary studies on which it was based, the best preparation for life. Plato's conception of higher education was quite different from the sophists. He thought rhetoric superficial because it gave one the means of expression without guarding him against its abuse. The statesman must first know how society is to be run. Exposition and persuasion come afterwards. And this is the thought process from where we have his Republic. The Republic is a series of dialectic and philosophical thought exercises, often between Glaucon and Socrates. That, in some ways, spells out what an ideal ruler would be like, and how he would rule society in an intelligent way. Glaucon and Adeimantus, Plato's brothers, play a role in this. The good as ultimate object of knowledge, Plato proceeds to the education of the philosopher, with which the rest of this part and the whole of the next part are concerned. And here we have the end of Book 6. With descriptions and thought exercises, philosophical, dialectic, the Sun Allegory and the Divided Line. And in Book 7, we have the Allegory of the Cave. In the Sun Simile, we have an analogy of light and the perception of the intelligible world compared to that of the visible world. Truth and the good, a source of reality and truth. Intelligibility to objects and thoughts. The power of knowing for the mind and the faculty of knowledge is all related to goodness, or the good, the intelligible world, what we can think and understand. And on this side we have the sun representing the visible world. The sun as a source of growth and light. It gives visibility to objects of sense and the power of seeing to the eye is related to the faculty of sight. So comparing and juxtaposing what we can see in reality, what we perceive, and what we can understand in intelligence and knowledge. The divided line follows this sun simile and seeks to illustrate further the relation between the two orders of reality, which the sun does from a certain point of view. And here we have these states of mind, and there is an illustration of Plato's line. Lee writes, the purpose of the line is not primarily to give a classification of objects, but both of the two states of mind correlate with the intelligible realm and deal with the same kind of object or forms, though each deals with them in a different way. And though in the physical world there is a difference between physical things and their shadows, that difference is used primarily to illustrate the degrees of truth or genuineness in what is apprehended. We know very little about a thing if our knowledge is confined to shadows or images of it, or, for that matter, to its superficial appearance. And this is an illustration of this simile. We have the visible or physical realm and the much larger intelligible realm. And the realm of shadows and images, of physical things and of forms, correlating with opinion, or doxa, belief and illusion, and with knowledge or solid intelligence or dialectic and mathematical reasoning. So you can see Plato's idea of educating statesmen to use these different perspectives. But now we come to the Cave Allegory in Book 7. Let's make this cave as I read to you, so we can actually see what's happening in the allegory. I want you to go on to picture the enlightenment or ignorance of our human condition somewhat as follows. Imagine an underground chamber, like a cave, with a long entrance open to the daylight, and as wide as the cave. In this chamber, there are men who have been prisoners there since they were children, their legs and necks being so fastened that they can only look straight ahead of them and cannot turn their heads. Some way off, behind and higher up, a fire is burning, and between the fire and the prisoners, and above them runs a road, in front of which a curtain wall has been built, like the screen at puppet shows between the operators and their audience, above which they show their puppets. Imagine further that there are men carrying all sorts of gear behind the curtain wall, projecting above it, and including figures of men and animals made of wood and stone and all sorts of other materials, and that some of these men, as you would expect, are talking and some not. An odd picture and an odd sort of prisoner. They are drawn from life, replied Socrates. For tell me, do you think our prisoners could see anything of themselves or their fellows except the shadows thrown by the fire on the wall of the cave opposite them? And would they see anything more of the objects carried along the road? Of course not. Then if they were able to talk to each other, would they not assume that the shadows they saw were the real things? And if the wall of their prison opposite them reflected sound, don't you think that they would suppose, whenever one of the passers-by on the road spoke, that the voice belonged to the shadow passing before them? And so, in every way, they would believe that the shadows of the objects we mentioned were the whole truth. Then think what would naturally happen to them if they were released from their bonds and cured of their delusions. Suppose one of them were let loose and suddenly compelled to stand up and turn his head and look and walk towards the fire. All these actions would be painful, and he would be too dazzled to see properly the objects of which he used to see the shadows. What do you think he would say if he was told that what he used to see was so much empty nonsense, and that what he was now nearer reality and seeing more correctly, because he was turned towards objects that were more real? And if on top of that he were compelled to say what each of the passing objects was when it was pointed out to him, don't you think he would be at a loss, and think that what he used to see was far truer than the objects now being pointed out to him? And if he were made to look directly at the light of the fire, it would hurt his eyes, and he would turn back and retreat to the things which he could see properly, which he would think really clearer than the things being shown him. And if, went on Socrates, he were forcibly dragged up the steep and rugged ascent, and not let go until he had been dragged out into the sunlight, the process would be a painful one, to which he would much object, and when he emerged into the light, his objects he was now told were real. Because, of course, he would need to grow accustomed to the light before he could see the things in the upper world outside the cave. First, he would find it easiest to look at shadows. Next, at the reflections of men and other objects in water. And later on at the objects themselves. After that, he would find it easier to observe the heavenly bodies and the sky itself at night, and to look at the light of the moon and stars rather than at the sun and its light by day. The thing he would be able to do last would be to look directly at the sun itself and gaze at it without using reflections in water or any other medium, but as it is in itself. Later on, he would come to the conclusion that this is the sun that produces the changing seasons and years and controls everything in the visible world, and is, in a sense, responsible for everything that he and his fellow prisoners used to see. That is the conclusion which he would obviously reach. And when he thought of his first home and what passed for wisdom there, and of his fellow prisoners, don't you think he would congratulate himself on his good fortune and be sorry for them? There was probably a certain amount of honor and glory to be won among the prisoners, and prizes for keen-sightedness for those best able to remember the order of sequence among the passing shadows, and so to be best able to divine their future appearances. Will our released prisoner want these prizes, or envy this power or honor? Won't he be more likely to feel, as Homer says, that he would far rather be a serf in the house of some landless man, or indeed anything else in the world, than hold the opinions and live the life that they do? Then what do you think would happen if he went back to sit in his old seat in the cave? Wouldn't his eyes be blinded by the darkness because he had come suddenly out of the sunlight? And if he had to discriminate between the shadows in competition with the other prisoners, while he was still blinded and before his eyes got used to the darkness, a process that would take some time, wouldn't he be likely to make a fool of himself? And they would say that his visit to the upper world had ruined his sight, and that the ascent was not worth even attempting, and if anyone tried to release them and lead them up, they would kill him if they could lay hands on him. Now, my dear Glaucon, this simile must be connected throughout with what preceded it. The realm revealed by sight corresponds to the prison, and the light of the fire in the prison to the power of the sun, and you won't go wrong if you connect the ascent into the upper world and the sight of the objects there with the upward progress of the mind into the intelligible region. That, at any rate, is my interpretation, which is what you are anxious to hear. The truth of the matter is, after all, known only to God. But in my opinion, for what it is worth, the final thing to be perceived in the intelligible region, and perceived only with difficulty, is the form of the good. Once seen, it is inferred to be responsible for whatever is right and valuable in anything producing in the visible region light and the source of light, and being in the intelligible region itself, controlling source of truth and intelligence. And anyone who is going to act rationally, either in public or private life, must have sight of it. Thus, according to Socrates, prisoner who has been freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not a reality at all. For a philosopher aims to understand and perceive the higher levels of reality, the natural sciences, mathematics, geometry, deductive logic, and the theory of form. But the other prisoners in the cave have no desire to leave their prison. They think they know no better life. One of the insoluble debates is whether Plato's analogy is to be interpreted philosophically or politically. We can see, having looked at the two previous analogies of the sun and the line, that there is definitely a political element, not the least of which is the name of the tome itself, Plato's Republic. In addition to his academy, where this philosophy would most certainly have been discussed. The one view suggests that the cave analogy represents our innate intellectual incapacity, contrasting our lesser understanding with that of the philosopher king, or any philosopher who reaches higher levels of reality. In addition to an allegory about people who are unable or unwilling to seek truth and wisdom. From another viewpoint, the cave is an allegory of human nature, and it symbolizes the opposition between the philosopher and the corruption of prevailing political conditions. The 20th century German philosopher Heidegger offered an interpretation according to human freedom in his book The Essence of Human Freedom, positing that the essence of truth is not something as an object, but rather a way of being. Other critics, favoring a political interpretation of Plato's allegory, have been at odds with the more philosophical interpretations and theory of ideas. As the reader can see, this allegory comes in the book after the presentation of the divided line and the analogy of the sun. Consequently, it is quite easy to draw a link between these allegories. In addition to all of these interpretations and explorations of human nature, of education and seeking of wisdom, we can also look at many applications of this analogy. No doubt we can see in all of today's headlines how the world has little changed since Plato and Socrates were positing how to make society a better place, how humans could better themselves with wisdom and understanding and new perspectives. Here in this study, these perspectives have ignited my imagination in looking at our artist Tove Jansson and her drawings of this one especially, the Moomin Troll, and all of the creatures dancing by the fire. This one is done in surround the shapes, and we see a black and white contrast. And Moomin Troll and his friends, and Moomin Mama at the bottom. And we can see the fire, the flames rising, and we can even imagine a creature in the way the flames are licking the dark air. What kinds of creatures, what kinds of ideas do we see in those flames? What kinds of shadows are projected through the flames as they rise into the atmosphere? And we see the moon just falling below the cliff face. These black inky drawings of Tove Jansson I find very intriguing. It's as if we're taking a voyage into our own understanding, our own intellect, our own psyche and imagination, asking ourselves, how far can we go to the edge and beyond of what we know? How can we turn reality into wisdom and intelligence? How many realities can we find? How can we use that to help other people? Here we see Tove has used this very, what I find to be Finnish way of looking at these fantastical scenes for her illustration of the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit of J.R.R. Tolkien. Thank you for coming with me, my friend, into this short introduction of Plato's Cave Allegory, into philosophical thought and imagination, wherein lies the root of wisdom, knowledge, and innovation. Like the Moomins dancing around a fire, enjoy your imagination. Make the most of your intellectual capacity. Keep a calm, quiet psyche, and sleep well. Be good to yourself.